You're listening to the Forum Podcast, a production of Calvin Theological Seminary. For nearly 150 years, Calvin Seminary has been a thought leader in Reformed faith and scholarship. We invite you to join us and our guests as we wrestle with the questions of mercy, justice, faith, and formation. We do not have all the answers, but we believe how we pursue them matters. This is the Forum Podcast.
What do jazz and theology have in common? In this episode, New Testament scholar and jazz saxophonist Dr. Constantine Campbell, professor and research director at the Australian University College, joins Dr. Aaron Einfeld, director of lifelong learning at Calvin Theological Seminary, to explore the intersection of faith, artistry, and the state of American evangelicalism. From the communal rhythms of jazz to the fractures of tribalism in the church, Dr. Campbell offers a candid, deeply personal reflection on grace, creativity, and what it means to follow Jesus with freedom.
Well, welcome, Dr. Campbell, to the Forum Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I'm really excited to meet you and to talk with you for a lot of different reasons. One is you're quite an accomplished scholar. You've produced videos. You've written books in different genres. But most importantly, you're a jazz musician.
Most importantly, first and foremost. That's right.
Yeah, we were talking a bit before the show. We both share that passion. We're both jazz musicians.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you about your jazz background, actually, because I haven't ever met a theologian who can talk eloquently about jazz composition and jazz performance. So, yeah, tell me a little bit about your jazz background.
Well, I guess jazz was really my first love, like in high school, before I became a Christian at all. Jazz sort of captured my heart, if you like. I sort of became a bit obsessed with it. I was learning saxophone, started practicing several hours a day, ignoring all my studies and just doing that. And all I wanted to do was be a professional jazz musician. And I went to university to study jazz performance, and it was actually at university where I became a Christian. And then this sort of weird conflict occurred a little bit because I realized that, the Christian thing is sort of like, Jesus has to be Lord and number one sort of thing. And I'm like, pretty sure that's jazz in my life. And so I had to sort of figure a lot of that out early on. And I went through various phases of trying to negotiate or figure out where does music fit with being a Christian. And there were some obvious answers like, well, play in church, or, when you write music, make it based on a scripture or something like that. And, did all that and all that sort of thing. But there wasn't really, at least in my neck of the woods, much theological integration with the arts, apart from sort of utilitarian, how to use music to achieve some sort of gospel goal or evangelism mission goal, something like that. And I played well into that, for a long time. I didn't really have an integrated sort of like God is the creator, and that the arts have a role in his creation, and it's part of what it means to be made in the image of God is to create. And actually we're all creators in different ways. And, that's been a slowly evolving thing for me. And rather than a side, because then I ended up, like I did do the professional jazz thing, but also ended up going to seminary and doing the Bible teaching thing and then Bible scholarship thing. And jazz was always still a passion, and I'd still gig professionally and things like that. But it was sort of like on the side. I can never call it a hobby. It's not in the category of hobby, but
Passion, maybe. It's kind of a cliche word, but a passion, right?
It's like your professionally trained passion that people pay you to do. So it's not a hobby, But it's still on the side. I wouldn't give it a lot of time. And I feel like this is what I'm supposed to be. As a Christian, I'm supposed to be doing this other thing. But in more recent years, especially since being back in Australia the last 5.5, nearly 6 years, it's sort of had a pretty even place with my work as a biblical scholar and in that world. And I've actually been, maybe first time, really happy about the integration in my life of being an artist and a theologian, or an artist and a biblical scholar, and I don't see a conflict anymore. And actually, I've started to understand that even as a biblical scholar, really I approach it as a creator, in the sense that when I write a book, there's a lot of crafting that goes into that, and art even, and yeah, there's a lot of intense academia stuff, but I really want to produce something that's beautiful and that will speak to people and communicate. And I'm doing the same thing when I play jazz. I want to communicate something to people, but I also want to create something beautiful. And I realized, there's something that they do have in common, and it's that creator element. And I'm starting to, as a New Testament scholar, starting to push into that a little more theologically. And I think in the future I want to sort of write in that space and develop that area a bit in my own thinking.
Yeah.
But also for the sake of, for the church and for other artists, because I feel like, particularly in the sort of contemporary Western evangelical tradition, we've lost something, because it was certainly not always the case, right? And
Right.
other church traditions today have a much more robust understanding of the role of the arts theologically, and it's sort of become very flat. And I want to help us like recapture a vision for the arts and faith, really.
I love that you talked about God as creator. I'm married to an artist and an art teacher, so
we have visual artist.
Yeah, visual artist. Yeah, she has multiple disciplines. She teaches art in a classroom, does art on her own. She's made similar observations about kind of the shallowness of the way Christians often think about art, and so oftentimes she'll say, "Well, if you just paint something like paint a cross, it's done.
Yeah,
There's
that's
no
it.
conversation anymore."
Yeah.
And what strikes me as jazz, and I'll admit to the audience here, I'm a little biased. I'm a jazz musician as well, so a lot of angles going on here.
Yeah, that's right.
That in some ways, jazz is like the epitome of creativity because you're creating literally on the spot. You're improvising. If people don't understand that or know that about jazz, is that oftentimes there's a lick or a melody, and then people play with it live on the spot.
Yeah.
And so it actually is live creation.
That's right.
What unlocked in you that allowed you to put that together and not see them as conflict, like the whole integration of your faith and your craft, your art?
It's been a long journey, sort of a question, I guess, ticking in the background for a long time. And I think a lot of my sort of academic work is some question from way back when that's just been mulled over in the back of my mind for a long time. And you notice when people say something relevant to it, or you see a book published in the area, and just over years, this sort of slow reflection. But I guess it sort of came to a head, if you like, when I returned to Australia, because I was living in the same city as my alma mater, the Australian National University School of Music, and people I'd studied with and had played with for years were now kind of the faculty teaching there.
I see.
And they invited me to come in and teach and become part of that community. And at the same time, I started working for a theological institution called Sydney College of Divinity. And but my new boss and my new role were both really flexible. And I said, look, by the way, part of this is part of the teaching music led to me doing a PhD in music, which I've just completed this year. But
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. But when I was talking about taking on this new job as a research director at Sydney College of Divinity, I was saying, look, I'm doing this PhD in music, and music's become really important again, and I'm spending a lot of time doing that. And my boss was like, cool.
Nice.
Do that. Don't let us stop you. just do as much as you want.
You just had permission.
Yeah, and he said, look, all he really cares about is the results in the job I've been asked to do.
Right.
Doesn't care how much time I spend doing it or when. So if I need to slot things around for a gig or for teaching a class at the music school or whatever, totally cool. And I'm like, oh, it's the first time I've been in that sort of situation. And all of a sudden they could coexist.
Yeah.
And once they could coexist in my practice, it made it a lot easier for me to notice the similar mindset that I'm using across those spheres and realizing I'm the same person doing this and doing that. I'm not two different people. They're integrated in me. So what's going on there theologically?
Yeah.
You know?
Say more about that. So you teach jazz performance. I'm assuming you teach New Testament or Greek. How are they the same? How are they different?
Well, at the moment, I'm not really teaching New Testament and Greek. I'm a research director, so I'm running our PhD program, and I'm supervising New Testament PhDs.
Perfect.
But I've spent many years teaching New Testament, various subjects, and Greek.
Yeah, where are the parallels?
So many, so many. Like, one thing, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, one thing that I really see in common is this internalization of knowledge. So there's a point, and I guess artists might even call it mastery. I mean, I feel, it feels like a bit of an egotistical term to use.
We're never quite masters.
Yeah. But part of, if I accept that part of mastery is that you never really arrive. And part of what makes a master is that they're always, like even Herbie Hancock, 84 years old, who I heard a few weeks ago in Australia, still perfecting the art, you know. So if you take mastery in that sense, I felt like like teaching well in New Testament, and especially like a language like Greek, requires deep internalization. And everyone who's taught knows how different it is when you're teaching something like that versus when you're teaching something that you're one lecture ahead of the students on.
Right.
And there's this mad panic, and you don't, because I've done that too, that you hope the students don't find out how thin you are on this area or that area. Or if they ask that question, I'm sunk or whatever. You know, whereas when you have the deep internalization, it's a totally different experience, and it enables you to teach in a totally different way with a freedom. And I feel that is parallel to jazz, because to improvise at a really high level, you need to have internalized the music, all the rules, all the technique, all the theory in a way such that you don't have to think about it, you're not threatened by it, it's not a challenge for you, and you just get to convey your musicality through it. So like as a practitioner, that's a sort of really practical commonality, I guess. But I feel like if I'm moving from one to the other, I'm sort of doing the same thing, just with different stuff. You know, it feels the same to me. Yeah.
So my experience in knowing a lot of musicians in jazz, we tend to sometimes as a beginner, we overthink when it's time to play that solo.
Yeah.
I wonder if you see that, but then maybe pivot that to people studying theologically or understanding the Bible. You see that kind of overthinking as well, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic seminary problem, I think, that you maybe for the first time really start to intellectualize your faith, and there's students often encounter maybe a disconnect between the mind and the heart, and for the first time, the scriptures that have been read at sort of a heart level, engaging your mind as well, of course, but now being engaged, you know, historically as a historical artifact, or as a literary artifact or something like that. And a lot of students struggle with it. And I when I went to seminary, I experienced that too, but I was not afraid of it because I experienced the exact same thing in music school. Because this music that I had loved and was passionate about and sort of blundered through with a lot of passion, now was being intellectualized, now was being pared down, deconstructed, and rebuilt. And you do have the same disconnect. It's like I'm in my head a lot. I'm thinking about the music like this. And where's that love I used to have? It feels like I've lost it. But if you trust the process and you follow it through to the end, they come back together again. and I realized, I can re-engage the heart now because I've mastered the material to the point where it's not in the way anymore. It's not it's not stopping me from engaging my heart, because often the frontal cortex, your active brain, if it's too full of stuff, it prevents you from really going deep with it. And I really learnt that as a musician, and especially as an improviser. And I think the same thing can happen with theology. If you follow it through with study of theology, trust the process, you will, once you really internalize that new knowledge and that revelation of God through the scriptures, you will rejoin heart and head. Mm-hmm. And it'll be, the funny thing, same thing happened in music school. I felt like leaving seminary, I knew less than I thought I knew my first day of seminary.
It's not uncommon, right?
Yeah, right. But that's actually, again, that's part of what the process does. There's it humbles you and teaches you how much you don't know. And that's like the first step to real wisdom, is to know that you don't know. So, there's those sorts of parallels. Music in lots of ways is an expression of life, I feel like. And so actually should be part of our thinking about anthropology or our theological anthropology. Mm-hmm. Music can fit in that space. And that being the case, it has a lot to teach us just about being human. And theology, it's the study of God, right? It's theos. But it's also a study of humanity and our relationship to God and with each other. And so the lessons you learn from art or any sphere of life ultimately will find parallels in the study of theology, I think.
Right.
Right.
Something that strikes me about jazz then is that when you are performing, and you just had a gig here in Grand Rapids last night, there's something interactive about it. You're not on your own producing something, right? Someone's playing a melody, someone in the background's kind of toys with it, and then someone else hears that, and then they build onto that. So there's this collective construction of what's happening. Yeah. And if you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, you really get to enjoy it at a deeper level. Yeah. I wonder if there's something parallel, and I don't want to force this, right? But with theology, is there a communal kind of co-creation part as well, where we shouldn't be doing this on our own? Or tell me about that.
I really think, I think that's a great question. And I really do think theology should be done in a communal context. With music, like you do a lot of practice on your own, all by yourself. But then when you're performing, unless you're doing solo piano or something. But for me, one of the great joys of performing jazz is that collaborative thing and having those musical personalities interact with each other and listen to each other and bounce off each other. It's one of the great joys. And it is a relational thing, and it's a very bonding thing. You become close, you become friends just through the practice of playing together. And I think that enriching element of the community has so many parallels. First of all, to the church, because we're a Christ body, different body parts of the one body, and we enrich each other by being connected. But also in theology, you might have to do a lot of hours on your own, studying Greek, learning your paradigms, or reading Calvin, or whatever it is. Right. And you have to do those yards, if you're really going to do it properly. But in academia, for example, that is a collaborative practice. We're interacting with each other's written work, or we're going to conferences. I'm going to a conference at the end of the week where you will rub shoulders with hundreds of other scholars and talk about what you're working on, what you're thinking about, what you're reading. And that is, I think, for me, my experience, a vital element of being a New Testament scholar. And I don't want to do that on my own. And I think that's where you can easily go wrong. That's why we have peer review in academia in general. Our peers help us to achieve a standard together, and you contribute to conversation. And sometimes they're angry conversations, but they sharpen each other and help each other and push each other.
So maybe this isn't a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and you can say, I don't want to answer this. You're going to, because you brought it up, you're going to this conference.
Yeah.
What % of the scholars there do you think are playing jazz? And what % do you think?
Do you mean that literally?
No, not literally.
Metaphorically.
Yeah, we're going.
Because that's low.
Yeah, exactly. You got to find the other person. So, and what % are still in the place where they're kind of pursuing the need to be the expert, like the solo expert? I think what I've observed, I've been in theological education and working with pastors for over a decade, and I've observed a lot of people who have still this pressure of being the expert and an anxiety about all of a sudden doing it together because they're supposed to know, especially once they get the degree. So I guess what I'm wondering is how common is it for someone to have gone through and there's a lightness and an improvisation happening at the conference, and how many people do you think are still maybe in school in that way? They're still schooling in the way they think about it. You see what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I've got no way to quantify that.
Of course not. That's why I asked.
But I can tell you, I know almost instantly whether a person is one or the other.
And how do you know?
The first group, the jazz group, there's an openness to new things.
Okay.
So you talk about they say, what are you working on? And I'm like, oh, I'm working on this. And they go, oh, fascinating.
Curiosity.
There's curiosity. There's a sort of willingness to let whatever you're working on to impact their own views on the thing. And they'll go, you know what? I never thought of it that way. I've always thought this.
Yeah.
And maybe that's right. But I'm really going to think about what you're saying here. Whereas the other type, almost instantly because you say, da-da-da, and they go, oh, no, it's that.
Right.
It's like, oh, I don't think that's or it's sort of just turned like a judo move against you or something.
You're
like
cornered
to
somehow.
show their own expertise.
Yeah.
It's about them. It's about ultimately their ego, I had to say it. But, and I'm sure that exists all through academia in every field. But obviously I prefer the former group. And those are the people that make it a real joy to work in that space.
Yeah.
And one little anecdote, when I was quite early on in my sort of academic career, I hate that term career, but academic career, and just completed my PhD, and it had been published, and a senior scholar who had been a mentor of mine, a great New Testament scholar, who was in his 70s, right? So established reputation, had taught me, had read my book, and said, this commentary I'm working on, I want to apply what you've researched, and can you help me? Can we talk about some verses here or there, and how you would apply this and that? And I found that incredibly humbling.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, wow. First of all, who am I? But second, here's a guy at the end of his career with an established reputation, produced some wonderful contributions to New Testament scholarship, revered in our circles, humbling himself and asking me how to help him to incorporate new scholarship and new ideas into his own work. And I'm like, man, but you see the same thing among the best musicians.
Of course.
The best musicians are like, wow, I've not heard that sound before. I want to check that out, And they're not threatened by younger people doing different things. They're sort of like going, oh, how can I? And we talked about when I saw Herbie Hancock a few weeks ago. He had this young drummer who I knew everyone in the band except the drummer. He was a 26-year-old guy. So here's this 84-year-old master, world-renowned Herbie Hancock on piano, playing with this 26-year-old drummer, and they're looking at each other and they're smiling at each other. And you can tell the young drummer's bringing this sort of cutting-edge, like fusion-y jazz stuff, and Herbie is taking that energy and doing something with it. And making himself young with it.
It's like an invitation to join what he's doing, right?
Yeah, and I'm like, that's the same thing, but in that world. It's just the older master interacting with the younger what they've got to bring and encouraging that, and they're inspiring each other and they're energizing each other. And I'm like, when you see that in scholarship, that's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm.
When you see a doctoral supervisor with that relationship with their PhD student, that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
you've got a new book out. I think
Yeah.
it's still new.
newish. Yeah.
Newish. And, there's this game, I think it was on Sesame Street, the show of like, which one of these is not like the other?
Yeah.
So, of course, you've got these heavy-hitting, solid, theological, important books. People around here cite you
Right.
when they're writing papers and their dissertations. And then you've written a book more recently, and I've got it in front of me, called Jesus v. Evangelicals, or Jesus versus Evangelicals. And there's a picture of a table that's been flipped over, and there's money all over the floor.
Yeah.
But tell me about your decision to write this book.
Yeah. You're right. It's the one that's not like the others. Really, I think this book comes out of a place of wanting to integrate my reading and study of the scriptures with life and the church.
Okay.
So I often found myself, whether teaching in America or teaching in Australia, we're talking about a biblical text or a passage, and I feel like, there's something the church needs to hear from this passage that it's not hearing, or it's taking it in a direction that I think is not how it's intended.
Sure.
Or wouldn't the church be blessed or rebuked or challenged or encouraged? And I can feel it in the students because they're coming from their own church traditions, and they can recognize what I'm identifying, and we identify it together.
Mm-hmm.
They go, yeah, my church, this and that. And I don't think my church has read this passage, or that
Right.
sort of thing,
Right.
And I'm like, we would talk just sort of anecdotally, and it's part of, integrating scripture and theology with the real world, the world we live in, church life, Christian life. And I know that I want to do that for me personally, and I want to help students or whoever in the community of scholarship that I'm in, that I'm part of, to do that too. So this book is really an outworking of that, in the sense that the evangelical church, particularly the American evangelical church, has got some problems.
Yeah, I think the subtitle is actually a biblical critique of a wayward movement.
Yeah. So the word wayward, some people didn't like that very much.
Biblical allusions, right? The wayward.
Yeah. But I was serious about it because, of course, it's not true of everybody. Of course, that's not, I say that many times in the book. And there are always dangers in generalizing. And I could be accused of not being nuanced enough. And what about this church? And what about that, And I'm like, yeah, of course, right? And there's lots that's good.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not willing to generalize, then you will actually miss some big patterns that are problematic, growing, and potentially disastrous.
And sometimes people, I know as individuals, there's a question I like to ask, is it, if you lacked self-awareness, would you know it?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's a silly question, but it's like, it gets you to think a little bit. Where you sometimes need someone from the outside.
That's right.
Or a parallel side
Yeah.
to look at things with a fresh eyes. And that's my interpretation, is that you have done that with
you.
this.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that, I say that in there, that sometimes you need someone else to point out your blind spots.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we have blind spots in Australia
Everyone's
too.
got it.
But by definition, I need someone else
Exactly.
to point them out to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so we there's a couple points, right, you make toward the end of the book. You distill it down.
Yeah.
And then you distill it down again into
Right.
the bullet points. And I thought, I bet this was his outline before he wrote the book. These were his points that he was
Right.
trying to make. And one thing that you say is you talk about how politicized American evangelicalism is.
Yeah.
And almost to the point that you say the spiritual nature has been distorted.
Yeah.
And what you then say is that it's fueled by this assumption that political power will transform American culture or American culture specifically.
Yeah.
Now, I got to put yourself in my shoes. I'm reading this amidst our most recent election.
Right.
Reading
Yeah,
this.
that's right.
Where it was really, people trying to
Yeah.
decide who's going to have the power.
Yeah.
So say a little bit about that point, maybe and what's at stake. So, of course, sometimes we point out an issue or a challenge, and I like to take it even further and say, okay, well, yes, if that's a problem, but then what does that problem then cause?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's assume that the goal of this political activity by evangelicals in America is to transform America.
Right.
And I think that's a reasonable assumption, not always true. But generally speaking, they want to see a transformed America for Christ, or a more Christian America, or see America as God's blessed country, God's chosen nation, something like that. But basically want to see Christianity thrive in America. Let's say that's the goal. The question becomes, all right, how do you achieve the goal? What Jesus says in the Great Commission is, go and make disciples of every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I think that's the New Testament's instruction for what we're supposed to be doing in the world, is mission. And if you are trying to transform America through a different means, which is, say, political legislation or legislative coercion, like legislating Christian moral values, will you be making disciples of Jesus? And the answer is, I think, profoundly no. That is not how people are changed. That is not how people's hearts are transformed. That is not how they become Christian or want to adopt Christian morality or values or way of thinking or worldview at all. Because laws don't change hearts. That's the bottom line. And sociologist James Davison Hunter wrote a book about this, saying that cultural change is rarely, if ever, a product of a top-down legislative political agenda. Cultural change happens from the grassroots through the arts, through persuasion, conversation, community, institutions like universities. That's where worldviews are formed and shaped, for better or for worse. But that's how it happens. And you cannot take a shortcut and say, we're going to ban this or that at a legislative level, and that's going to make people live in a more Christian way. That's simply not going to work. And so that's part A. Part B is the tragedy of that. Not only that whole thing is tragic to begin with because it's wrong-headed, but the double tragedy is because evangelicals are perceived as being power-mongering, power-hungry, hypocritical, and just want to make everyone live the way they think they should. They're actually disabling them from conducting the mission of making disciples because no one wants to be discipled by a hypocrite.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot at stake.
There's a lot at stake. Yeah.
I want to talk about another dynamic too. So we're in Michigan. Michigan was one of these battleground states where both politicians, they visit a lot. Like one time I was downtown and I couldn't get to where I was going because there's so many candidates downtown. We're getting texted all the time.
Yeah.
And about, do this or don't do that. What struck me about the whole process is that it was so fear-mongering.
Yeah.
That's how we experience it.
Yeah.
Now, some of the fear comes from observable facts that are terrifying. Some of the fear comes from outright lies. So regardless of kind of who's saying what, there's a sense of like, you should be terrified of the other person.
Yeah.
I don't hear a lot of sermons about fear in
Yeah.
church these days.
Yeah.
And so what's your counsel? What's your pastoral moment for me as a person in the United States who's just had a long cycle of fear-mongering?
Yeah.
What do I need to hear? What's the good news that I need to hear?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I think it's a good analysis observation. Perfect love drives out fear. And I think the Christian who really knows God through Jesus Christ and knows and is secure in God's love for them and God's care of the world and the sovereignty of God can sit back a little and not freak out.
Right.
Now I'm not advocating lack of political involvement or you should politics is the world and we should just ignore it or not be interested in it. But we have a much bigger picture. And part of the problem of conflating your Christian faith with nationalism, which a lot of American Christians have done historically and today, is that what happens to your nation becomes disproportionately important. Now, of course, it's important for everyone who lives there. And in America's case, it's important for everyone in the world because of the huge influence of America throughout the whole world. But if you really believe that Jesus' kingdom is not of this world, and if you really believe that God is going to renew the heavens and the earth, why does it really matter what happens to America? What are you worried about? What if it even becomes completely pagan? What if it becomes a Muslim state? Well, okay, not ideal, you might say, but it's not the end of the world. Do you think that's going to thwart God's purposes? I mean, all the early churches, the first century churches, Paul's churches, were in Turkey today. Turkey is 98% Muslim. Do we say, oh, wow, that's, that has thwarted God's purposes for the world? No, not at all. And in fact, that's the pattern. Like, the truth of Jesus moves around the planet. It began in the Middle East and moved to the West. Now it's moving east. Asia. The church is booming in Asia and Africa. It used to be, 150 years ago that a British missionary going to Africa would pack their belongings in a coffin because they had a life expectancy of 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And they would come back in the coffin. That's how tough Africa was for Christian mission. Now there are more Anglicans in Nigeria than the rest of the whole world put together. So what are we really worried about? Yeah, I get it. You're worried about your children, your grandchildren. You're worried about your quality of life. You're worried about being marginalized as a Christian in an increasingly secular society. I get all that, and that might be uncomfortable. But also the scriptures teach us and history teaches us that God works through a persecuted church. That's where real growth is happening. So my question comes down to this. Are you really concerned about the kingdom of God and God's purposes in the world, or are you really only concerned about your own country and your place in it? And I think that's a really important question for American Christians to think about.
Yeah, thanks. Something else you talk about in the book is about kind of the acceptable and unacceptable sins that become like decided by tribal cultures. When you say tribal, you mean like groups of people.
Yeah.
There's kind of a tribalism of this group has informally agreed that certain sins are really bad, certain are excusable, and that kind of spills over into how people think about marriage. So reading that, I thought, there's a lot of ways that I can see that happening. Give us some advice about how do you know when you're reading something with your own kind of tribal lens?
Yeah.
Because we all do this. And how do you know when you've gotten to the quote, the good stuff, the real stuff?
Yeah.
Like, how do we help prevent that from happening as we're studying, as we're living our lives?
Well, I think for one thing, to recognize that tribes exist. We have these tribal cultures, and they're not all bad. I mean, humanity kind of arguably thrived in its early history because we're sort of social and tribal and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely an unhealthy side to tribalism. And the first thing to do is a bit like your question earlier. What was it? If you don't know...
if you lacked self-awareness,
would you know it? Yeah. So one of the insidious things about tribalism is that you're often unaware that you're in a tribe and that it's affecting the way you think. So the first thing to recognize is that fact.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is to recognize other tribes aren't evil. They might be different.
Mm-hmm.
You might have some differences of opinion or disagreements, sometimes big differences. But the Christian tribes I'm talking about, I'm sure they also have a lot that's really great that you can learn from, be challenged by. So I think the first step is step outside your tribe, man.
Get outside.
Step outside. Go somewhere else. Read works by people that your tribe bans.
Yeah, right.
Or looks down on. Read them for yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's often surprising, that you're like, well, they pretty much believe what I believe. All the big things are in place. So open your mind.
Okay.
And I think that's the key. And also when you're reading the scriptures, and this is the other part of it, and the part I think that has brought me to this place, is read them honestly and openly and really notice what's there, rather than looking for what your tribe says is there.
Which we have, in psychology, we call it the confirmation bias.
Right.
We're literally wired to look for what we already believe.
That's right.
Makes you think about the communal reading, too.
Yeah.
Of you need someone outside of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
To help you with that.
That's right. And I think some of the most provocative preachers that have really helped me in my Christian development have been the ones that really challenge what you think the scriptures say. They say, you think this text is about this, don't you? Guess what? I don't think it is. Check this out. Have you noticed that? And you're like, oh, it's been there all along. I never saw it. I was blind to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big problem, especially for evangelicals, because we regard ourselves as the Bible people, and the Bible is the highest authority in matters of faith. And if you're reading the Bible in a truncated way because of your tribe, that's really significant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I've heard it said some ways that there's no one culture that has the ability to actually describe God.
Right.
Because God is so big that you actually need these multiple perspectives to try to start to get a sense for who God is.
Yeah.
Because how could one particular
Yeah.
version of how people are living together get to it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think so you started this by asking about acceptable and unacceptable sins.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about mission and reaching the world outside, a big part of that is who our version of God is and what the outsider is hearing. If they're hearing that God is this sort of tyrannical killjoy, very judgmental, going to jump on you for all your sexual sins and all this sort of stuff, that's not appealing. It's not appealing. And it's also, you're doing a disservice because you're not actually conveying the true God revealed by Christ, who's compassionate towards the sinner and the father of the prodigal son. So the tribalism has potential, I think, to really destroy witness and mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to get a little personal here.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
It's in your book, so I can ask you about this.
The cat's out of the bag.
I know. It's related to what we were just talking about with certain things that are acceptable or not. And, you wrote regarding a divorce you experienced that the most haunting and distressing experience of your life was getting divorced and its horrifying aftermath.
Yeah.
I mean, I read that as the intro to a chapter, and I had to just sit there a minute and think of the weight of that statement. And probably what had to happen inside of you to be able to put that into a, is it Zondervan, right? Let Zondervan tell the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it seemed like a pivot point where you're talking about the biblical critique probably of the tribal understanding of evangelicalism in the United States. And here you got this real personal example. So, and you explain why this was the case in the book a little bit. Referring to kind of the church shooting their wounded. When people are down, they don't help them in the way that maybe people could really use. So tell me about the role that the church played in that experience for you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I should acknowledge that my personal experience was kind of a big part of the process of coming to the point of writing this book. The book's not about that.
Of course.
And my views about certain things crystallized or even changed coming out of that experience. Now, some people will, and I'm upfront about that, some people, though, will critique that and say, he's changing his theology to fit a moral failure in his life or something like that, which is a very common way of, say, critiquing a liberal position or a liberal theologian or something like that. But I actually think it's the total other way around, in the sense that my personal experience brought me to a place where I could see and acknowledge and accept a reality that I had pretty much been in denial of. And I've talked to others who've had similar experiences, maybe not their own divorce, but a son, for example, and I remember talking to a professor at TEDS, Trinity, whose son was, his marriage was falling apart, and he said that prompted him to look again at the texts about divorce and remarriage, and prompted him to examine them much more closely than he ever had before. And I'm like, see, that's interesting. It's because it's personal now that you really take that question more seriously and actually do the work. Whereas before I was happy with pat answers.
You can intellectualize it.
Yeah.
It's outside of you.
It's out there. It affects other people. It doesn't really affect me. So you don't really do the heavy. So I think you'll find most people who've really worked hard on this issue have some sort of personal connection to it. And that's what's led them to do the work. And sure, sometimes, absolutely, you could be guilty of arriving at a conclusion that suits you now. But I think the more positive spin is when you're brought into that chaos and that tragedy and that difficulty, it forces a lot of questioning. And some of those pat answers don't stand up to scrutiny. And you need a more integrated and robust way of thinking about all these things, and including the texts that speak to the situation. So to answer you, I just wanted to put that out there because I know that question hangs in the air when I start talking about the personal side of the book for me. But
there's epistology in there, right?
Yeah,
something about how you know something. Wrong here.
That's right. That's right. But in answer to your question, my experience of church and Christians was both positive and negative. So some people who have been long-time friends, we're talking decades, we don't speak anymore. Like they just cut me off. And that might be for a variety of reasons, and I won't go into those reasons or presume to know what they all are. But others kind of harassed me, or wanted to rebuke me or challenge me or whatever. And I'm not saying rebuke is wrong or challenge is wrong. I'm not saying any of that. But other friends were like pure life to me. And one of the problems I think that evangelicals have around the issue of marriage is that we connect it so strongly to our faith that we think if a marriage fails, are you even Christian anymore? And that was, I was asked that a number of times. Are you still a Christian?
Wow.
And it was easy to be offended by that question, but also I understand the question because even in my own mind, I was like, when I thought divorce was going to happen, I did have it myself so closely attached to faith that I thought, oh, maybe I'll be done as a Christian if this happens. You know, maybe it's all going to blow apart. And what I discovered was almost right away, like when it actually happened, I rediscovered the grace of God, or discovered it in a new way, freshly powerful way, where it's realized, yeah, this is a huge failure and tragedy in your life, which I bear a great deal of responsibility for. I'm not going to say that this is like a one-sided thing or anything like that. I bear responsibility for this happening. But God still loves me, and there's nothing, like Romans 8 says, there's nothing that can separate us from the love of God in Christ. And I really believed that in a whole new way, in a profound way. But it was a pastor friend who helped me to get to that point.
Yeah.
He said, Con, you're going to get a lot of judgment from Christians.
This was on the front end of how this, when this was starting to happen.
When I got on Zoom and I called him and said,
Yeah.
this is what's happening. And he wasn't surprised. I mean, the people who knew me and my situation were not surprised at all. But he said, you're going to receive a lot of judgment. And he said, I want you to ignore them. And I want you to listen to the voice of your Heavenly Father, who says, I love you as a son. Sorry, I still get choked up thinking about it.
Yeah.
But for me, that was like a crystallizing moment where I was like, that's where it is. God loves me as his son. That's why the prodigal son is on my phone cover, Rembrandt, because, and I think about that parable every day, because that's the vision of God that I cling to, that loving Father who even after the great failure loves you and welcomes you as a son or a daughter, and nothing else matters. You know, so it also relativizes all the tribal, like little nitty gritty things that we fight about. It's like, man, you know, what matters is this.
Yeah.
You know, and say what you will about me, but I'm a son of God in Christ, and it doesn't matter what you say about me, you know. So it was good and bad, but there was a lot of bad, and I think a lot of divorced people have read my book and reached out to me, and have recounted similar stories. There've been others who've said, "Oh, that wasn't my experience," and the church was really loving, and I want to acknowledge that. You know?
Course.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. But there are a lot of people who felt alienated, judged, have been, cut off, and the book is, it's helped them because they're not alone, you know.
Yeah.
And there's something wrong with churches where we're not loving people who are going through what is, you know, potentially the worst experience of their life.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you're already leaning into my question of what got you through it.
Yeah.
But just as I hear you talk, I just hear like a sense of perseverance in your spirit about your experience, resources on the outside. But even like as we talked about jazz, like your perseverance of getting past I'm stuck in my theory, I've lost my love of this thing, and somehow getting through that kind of running in the mud kind of feeling with that, but then also with your study of Scripture, and all of a sudden it's intellectualized and you've lost this kind of heart with it. So it just seemed like there's this theme of perseverance that I hear in your story.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, it's a good observation. As you know, like for anyone who's engaged in any sort of long-term pursuit or struggle or just life.
Yeah.
Like that's a daily thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's the decisions you make every day.
Yeah.
And there are days where where I'm feeling less good about how things are going. But I guess for me, bottom line is I don't want to be a quitter. I can't respect that, and I can't respect myself if I quit. So I'll just keep going until it gets better.
Okay.
But I know Christianly that God sustained me through a few close friends, through a really loving extended family.
Yeah.
And I felt permission to be grumpy for a while.
Yeah,
I took
that's
solace.
okay.
I took
That's
solace in
okay.
the Psalms.
Yeah.
You know, the psalmist is like, it's amazing that in the scriptures, you know, God allows people to be like a bit cross with him.
Oh, more than a bit, right?
Like, what the heck, man? You know, and I felt I'm allowed to go through that. I'm not going to stay there, but it's okay to go through that.
Yeah.
And I understood God's bigger than that, and it's not going to be a deal cancellation if I'm like upset for a while. And you know, eventually you come through it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Forum Podcast. To learn more, go to theforum.calvinseminary.edu.